I used to believe that by the time I reached 40, I would have life all figured out, that everything would be in place, clear, predictable, like a carefully mapped out plan. But then 40 arrived like an unexpected storm, shaking up everything I thought I knew and rewriting the rules I had spent years trying to follow. Here's what no one really tells you. Turning 40 is not the beginning of the end. It is the start of something deeper, more authentic, and unapologetically real. And this is not just an inspiring idea, it is backed by research. Studies show that happiness levels tend to dip in our 30s, thanks to stress, the weight of expectations, and the constant pressure to make it. But then something shifts. Around 40, happiness begins to climb again, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because we stop living for approval, let go of the impossible standards we once chased, and finally embrace who we truly are. So if you're sitting here thinking, is this all there is? I have good news for you. Your best years aren't behind you. They're just getting started. Let's talk about why. By 40, you've survived enough failures to know that falling down isn't the end of the world. It's just proof that you were brave enough to try. That fear of what if I mess up starts losing its grip, because guess what? You've already messed up. And you're still here. I remember the first time I completely, spectacularly failed at something big. Not the kind of failure you can laugh off, but the kind that makes you want to pack up your life, move to a remote village, and start over as an anonymous goat herder. It was messy, it was public, and at the time, I thought it was the end of the world. But here's what I learned. It wasn't. When we're younger, failure feels catastrophic. We think one wrong turn will ruin everything. That if we choose the wrong career, take the wrong job, date the wrong person, say the wrong thing, we'll somehow break our lives beyond repair. So we play it safe. We make decisions based on fear instead of possibility. We avoid risks because we believe failure is proof that we're not good enough. But by 40, you've lived long enough to know that failure doesn't actually mean what you thought it did. It doesn't mean you're not capable or that you should stop trying. It doesn't mean you're not worthy. It just means you tried something hard and it didn't work. This time. And that's a powerful shift. There's research to back this up. Studies show that by midlife, people become less afraid of failure, not because they stop failing, but because they've learned that failure is survivable. They've learned that sometimes the things that don't work out are actually the best things that could have happened. Think about it. How many things in your life felt like disasters when they happened, but in hindsight were actually redirections? The job you didn't get, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that slipped away. Chances are those moments weren't the end of your story. They were just plot twists. And plot twists are where the good stuff happens. By 40, you realize that failure isn't a full stop. It's just a comma. It's a pause, a redirection, an invitation to try again with more wisdom, and maybe even with more humor. You learn to laugh at yourself a little more, to take things a little less personally. You start seeing failure as a teacher, not a verdict. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that if we fail, people will never forget it, that they'll judge us forever. But the truth? People are too busy worrying about their own lives to keep a running tab on your mistakes. That presentation you bombed, that project that flopped, that time you tripped over your own feet in front of an entire room, the only person still replaying that in their head is you. There's a kind of freedom that comes with this realization, the freedom to take risks, to try new things, to stop letting fear of embarrassment or imperfection hold you back. Because by 40, you know that no one gets through life without a few spectacular wipeouts. And here's what's even better. Failure loses its sting when you realize that the people who matter, the ones who truly love and respect you, aren't keeping score. They don't love you because you're flawless. They love you because you're real, because you're trying, because you're human. So if you're standing at the edge of a decision, hesitating because you're afraid to fail, I want you to ask yourself this. What would I do if I weren't afraid of getting it wrong? Because by 40, you start to understand that the only real failure is not trying at all. You stop collecting relationships like merit badges and start prioritizing the ones that actually nourish you. Studies show that deep, meaningful connections, not the number of friends, are what truly predict happiness. And by 40, you realize that saying no to the wrong people is just as important as saying yes to the right ones. When we're younger, relationships feel like a numbers game. The more the better. More friends, more invitations, more people who think we're fun or successful or interesting. We say yes to every social event, keep up with acquaintances we barely know, and pour energy into people who don't always pour it back. And for a while that works, until it doesn't. At some point, usually somewhere in your late 30s or early 40s, you wake up and realize you're exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. You start asking yourself, why am I spending time with people who drain me? Why am I still holding on to relationships that don't feel good? And then the real question sneaks in. What would happen if I stop? There's a moment, a quiet, life-changing moment, when you realize that you don't have to be available to everyone anymore. You don't have to say yes to every invitation. You don't have to keep friendships just because you've had them for a long time. You don't have to keep people in your life out of obligation, guilt, or fear of disappointing them. By 40, you learn that friendship isn't about quantity, it's about quality. Research shows that people with a few close, emotionally supportive relationships report higher levels of happiness and resilience, regardless of how many casual friends or social connections they have. It turns out you don't need 100 people who like your Instagram posts. You need a handful of people who will show up for you when life falls apart. And here's the thing, pruning relationships isn't easy. There's guilt, hesitation, even grief, but it's also necessary. There's a quote I love, you can't grow new things if you don't clear out the weeds. And by 40, you start to understand that some relationships are just that, weeds. They might have been beautiful once, they might have served a purpose, but if they're draining you instead of nourishing you, it's okay to let them go. There's power in learning to walk away from what no longer serves you. And just as important as who you stop making space for is who you start making space for. You begin investing in the people who feel like home. The ones who don't require you to be anything other than yourself. The ones who don't keep score, who don't make you prove your worth, who don't disappear when things get hard. These are the relationships worth nurturing because these are the ones that make life richer, not busier. And something else happens when you start choosing relationships with intention. Your self-worth rises. You stop settling. You stop bending over backward for people who wouldn't do the same for you. You stop tolerating one-sided friendships, toxic dynamics, and relationships that leave you questioning your own value. By 40, you realize that the people who are meant to be in your life will respect your boundaries, appreciate your time, and love you not for what you can give them, but simply for who you are. And when you stop spending energy on the wrong people, you free up space for the right ones. So if you're feeling the weight of relationships that no longer fit, here's your permission slip. You're allowed to let go. You're allowed to choose depth over breadth, real over performative, joy over obligation, and most of all, you're allowed to put your energy where it truly belongs, with the people who love you the way you deserve to be loved. Self-doubt doesn't disappear, but it does get quieter. Not because you suddenly feel invincible, but because you finally gathered enough evidence to prove that you are in fact capable. That voice in your head that used to scream, "Who do you think you are?" now just sighs and says, "All right, let's do this." When we're younger, self-doubt feels like a roommate that never moves out, loud, intrusive, and constantly questioning every decision we make. Are you sure you can handle this? What if you fail? What will people think? It's exhausting, but we listen to it because part of us believes that if we can just do everything right, if we can just be good enough, that voice will finally go away. But here's the truth. Self-doubt doesn't vanish. Confidence isn't about never hearing that voice again. It's about learning not to obey it. By 40, you've accumulated enough life experience to start questioning the credibility of that voice. You've seen yourself navigate hard things. You've fallen, failed, and gotten back up. And you start to realize, wait a minute, I've doubted myself before and I still figured it out. I've been scared before and I still showed up. I've been convinced I wasn't ready, and yet here I am. It's like collecting proof in a case against your own self-doubt. And after 40 years, the evidence is stacked in your favor. Research actually supports this shift. Studies show that as people age, their self-perception improves, not because they stop struggling, but because they stop putting so much weight on external validation. In your 20s and 30s, you care deeply about what others think. You shape your choices around their approval, fearing that one misstep will shatter your credibility, your reputation, your worth. But by 40, something remarkable happens. You start trusting yourself more than you trust the opinions of others. There's a freedom that comes with this. You start making decisions based on what feels right for you, not what will make you look successful or impressive or acceptable to the world. You start valuing your own inner wisdom over the noise of expectations. You stop constantly looking outside yourself for answers because for the first time you realize you've had them all along. And here's the best part. Once self-doubt quiets down, it makes room for something else. Courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. By 40, you start saying yes to things you would have once talked yourself out of. You start believing that you can pivot careers, or take that trip, or write that book, or start that business. You stop waiting for permission to live the way you've always wanted to. You also become far less interested in playing small. You stop dimming yourself to make others comfortable. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You start stepping into your own power, not in a way that shouts, "Look at me," but in a way that quietly declares, "I know who I am now." And that's the difference. In your 20s and 30s, confidence can feel performative, like something you have to prove. But by 40, confidence isn't about proving anything. It's about knowing deep in your bones that you are enough, not because you've done everything perfectly, but because you've lived enough to know that perfection was never the goal in the first place. So if you're still hearing that little voice of self-doubt, don't worry. It's not a sign that you're not ready. It's just an old habit that hasn't caught up with the person you've become. And the next time it shows up, you can smile, nod, and say, "I hear you, but I've got this." You start to redefine success on your own terms. Maybe success isn't climbing the corporate ladder, it's stepping off it entirely. Maybe it's choosing peace over productivity, joy over achievement. You realize that hustle culture sold you a lie, and you no longer need permission to live differently. For years, success was something external. A checklist, a moving target, get the degree, land the job, find the partner, buy the house, climb higher, earn more, do more. And for a while it feels good, like proof that you're on the right track, but then something shifts. Maybe it happens in your late 30s, maybe it's right at 40, maybe later, but at some point you wake up and think, wait, who am I actually doing all this for? By 40, you've checked enough boxes to realize that checking boxes doesn't actually bring fulfillment. Accomplishments can be meaningful, sure. Hard work can be rewarding, but when success is only defined by external markers, titles, promotions, paychecks, applause, it becomes a treadmill you can't get off. Because no matter how much you achieve, there's always more to do, more to prove, more to chase. And that "I'll finally be happy when" never actually arrives. Research backs this up. Studies show that while ambition and goal setting can create short-term satisfaction, long-term fulfillment comes from alignment, living in a way that reflects your values, not just your achievements. And by 40, you start to see the difference. You start questioning, what actually matters to me? What do I want my life to feel like, not just look like? And here's where things get interesting. You realize that real success might not be what you thought it was. Maybe it's not working 70-hour weeks for a job you secretly resent. Maybe it's not constantly striving for the next big thing. Maybe it's waking up without anxiety sitting on your chest. Maybe it's having slow mornings with your kids. Maybe it's pursuing a career that lights you up, even if it doesn't impress anyone else. Maybe it's finally choosing rest without guilt. And the best part, you stop waiting for permission. In your 20s and 30s, there's this underlying pressure to prove yourself, to earn your worth. You do what's expected. You say yes to opportunities because you should, not because you want to. But by 40, you realize no one is keeping score but you. And if you've been measuring success by someone else's ruler, you get to throw that ruler away. There's freedom in rewriting the definition. Maybe success looks like building something new. Maybe it looks like stepping back. Maybe it's about unbecoming everything you thought you had to be in order to become who you truly are. You also stop glorifying busy. When you're younger, being busy feels like a badge of honor, proof that you're important, in demand, needed. But by 40, busy just feels tiring. You start recognizing that being constantly overwhelmed isn't a status symbol. It's a signal that something needs to change. You realize that time is your most valuable resource, and you become fiercely protective of it. So you start saying no to things that drain you, no to overcommitting, no to proving your worth through exhaustion, no to chasing goals that don't actually excite you. And in that space, you make room for what does matter. Because at the end of the day, real success isn't about how much you've achieved, it's about how much you've lived, how much you've loved, how much peace you've allowed yourself to have. So if you're standing in the middle of your life wondering if you're behind, wondering if you should be doing more, let me remind you, you don't have to play by anyone else's rules. Your life, your definition of success, and you get to change it whenever you want. You stop waiting for the right time and start living your life now. At 40, you realize that there is no perfect moment, no guaranteed later, no magic signal that says you're finally ready. If something matters to you, the time to begin is now. For years, we tell ourselves stories about when we'll start living the way we truly want to. I'll travel when my career is more stable. I'll write the book when I have more confidence. I'll take better care of myself when things slow down. I'll have that hard conversation when the timing is right. We treat our dreams, our needs, even our joy as something that belongs to our future selves. But here's the problem. Later is a slippery thing. It keeps moving. It keeps making excuses. And if we're not careful, we wake up one day and realize we've spent our whole lives waiting. By 40, something shifts. You stop believing in the illusion of someday because you've lived long enough to see that time is not a promise, it's a privilege. You've lost people you thought would always be here. You've watched opportunities pass because you hesitated too long. You've learned, sometimes painfully, that life does not hand out guarantees. And so you stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating it instead. This doesn't mean you throw caution to the wind. It doesn't mean you quit your job tomorrow or make reckless choices. It means you stop letting fear of imperfection keep you from moving forward. It means you recognize that waiting until you feel ready is a trap, because ready isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And by 40, you start choosing differently. Research shows that as we age, our tolerance for regret increases. Studies have found that people in their 40s and beyond are more likely to take risks, not because they're reckless, but because they've seen what happens when they don't. They've learned that the pain of not trying is often worse than the fear of failing, and so they start saying yes. Yes to new experiences, yes to their own happiness, yes to things that once felt too scary, too selfish, too uncertain. You also start questioning the fears that have been holding you back. Fear of what people will think. By 40, you care less, not because you don't value others, but because you've spent enough time not doing things out of fear of judgment and you're tired of it. Fear of failing, you've failed before. And guess what? You survived. Fear of making the wrong choice, you realize that most choices aren't permanent. And even if they are, you trust yourself to handle the consequences. And here's the biggest shift. You stop putting conditions on your joy. You stop saying, I'll be happy when, and start asking what would make me happy now. You stop holding your own life hostage with the idea that you have to earn fun, adventure, or rest. You stop thinking that joy is something you get to experience only after you've checked all the responsible boxes. You realize that you can pursue your dreams and still be a good parent, a good partner, a responsible adult, that happiness is not a reward for suffering. It's part of a well-lived life. So you start. You book the trip instead of just talking about it. You write the first page of the book instead of waiting for inspiration to strike. You open the business, take the dance class, say I love you first. You stop overthinking every decision to death and start trusting that movement is what creates clarity, not waiting. At 40, you realize that time is going to pass anyway. The question is, how do you want to spend it? Scrolling through other people's lives, wondering when you'll have the courage to start your own? Or stepping forward, messy and imperfect, but fully alive? Because the truth is, your life isn't waiting for you. It's happening right now. And the only thing left to do is start living it. So here we are, standing at the threshold of what comes next, not waiting, not hesitating, just standing in the fullness of who we are, knowing that this is where life truly begins. Not because we have all the answers, not because we figured everything out, but because we've finally given ourselves permission to live on our own terms. By 40, you know that you are not behind, you are not too late, you are not past your prime. You are standing in the most powerful, most self-aware, most fearless version of yourself yet. And that changes everything, because now you trust yourself. Now you define success in a way that actually brings you peace. Now you stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating it. And that means anything is possible. So go, step into this next chapter with courage, with clarity, with the deep knowing that your life is not winding down, it's opening up. You get to decide what comes next. You get to build it, rewrite it, redefine it, live it. And if that little voice of doubt still whispers, "Who do you think you are?" you smile, take a deep breath, and answer, "I am someone who is just getting started." Good luck, and more importantly, enjoy the ride.